I'm Mason, 30 years old and a successful architect. For as long as I can remember, I've been second best to my brother Ethan in my mother's eyes. The ultimate proof. She chose to attend his 10th wedding anniversary party instead of my wedding day. It was just one in a lifetime of moments where I didn't matter enough. But everything changed when my grandmother's inheritance skipped over Mom entirely. Now she's suddenly begging for my forgiveness. Before I get into this story that changed my family forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, what happened next will show you it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I noticed the difference in how my mom treated me and my brother Ethan pretty early on. Our house was nice enough, a 2-story colonial in a good school district that my dad worked overtime to afford. Dad was an engineer who often worked late, leaving Mom to handle most of the day-to-day parenting. And that's where the problems started. Ethan was 4 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, he was clearly the golden child. His bedroom had the cool space theme wallpaper he wanted, while mine stayed the basic blue my parents chose before I was born. When Christmas came around, Ethan's pile of presents always towered over mine. I tried not to count, but kids notice these things. Ethan needs more because he's older, Mom would explain when I asked about it. But that explanation started wearing thin as the pattern continued year after year. The first time I really understood something was wrong was my 8th birthday. Mom had promised a special day with a magic-themed party since I'd recently become obsessed with card tricks. Dad had even hired a local magician to perform. My friends arrived, we played games, and everything was going great until about halfway through. "Mason, honey," Mom said, pulling me aside while my friends were eating cake. "I need to leave for a little while. Your brother needs help with his science project that's due tomorrow." I remember staring at her cake fork in hand, trying to process what she was saying. "But it's my birthday party. Dad's here and the magician is about to start. I'll be back before it's over." She kissed my forehead quickly. "Ethan's project is worth 30% of his grade." She didn't come back until after all my friends had left. Dad tried to make up for it, helping me open presents and making a big deal about each one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if it had been Ethan's birthday, Mom wouldn't have left for anything. As we got older, the pattern became more pronounced. I was actually the better student, consistently bringing home A's while Ethan struggled to maintain B's and C's. But somehow, Ethan's C+ in math warranted celebration and a special dinner out, while my straight A report card earned a quick, "good job," and then questions about why I wasn't participating in more extracurriculars like my brother. "Your brother is so well-rounded," Mom would say. "Colleges look for more than just good grades, Mason." The truth was, I did have interests and talents. I loved drawing and had a natural eye for design and architecture. By 6th grade, I was filling sketchbooks with building designs. My art teacher, Mrs. Lawson, even called my parents to talk about enrolling me in special weekend architecture programs for gifted students. Dad thought it was a great idea. Mom said we couldn't afford it, despite somehow finding money for Ethan's 3rd attempt at guitar lessons that same month. When I was 12, my grandmother Eleanor started to notice the disparity in how we were treated. Grandma Eleanor was my dad's mother, a sharp, elegant woman who had successfully run my grandfather's real estate business after he died young. She lived about an hour away and started inviting me to stay with her on weekends. "You have a special eye, Mason," she told me once while I was sketching her house. "Not everyone can see spaces the way you do." Those weekends with Grandma Eleanor became my refuge. She took me to museums, bought me proper drawing supplies, and actually listened when I talked about my dreams of becoming an architect. When I showed her my designs, she asked questions and offered suggestions rather than just patting my head and changing the subject to something Ethan had done. At home, the dynamic continued. When I was 14, I won first place in a statewide design competition for students. The award ceremony was on a Thursday evening, and I was excited to have both my parents there. "I'm sorry, Mason," Mom said the morning of the ceremony. "Ethan has a basketball game tonight, and you know how important team support is." Dad came to my ceremony alone and took me out for ice cream after to celebrate. "I'm proud of you, son," he said. "Really proud." I tried not to let it show how much Mom's absence hurt, but Dad knew. "Your mom loves you," he said carefully. Sometimes she doesn't see clearly." By high school, I developed a strategy for dealing with the favoritism. I focused on my own goals, spent time with Grandma Eleanor when I could, and tried to stop seeking Mom's approval. I had a few good friends who valued me, and teachers who encouraged my talents. Dad did his best to support me, though his demanding job meant he wasn't around as much as either of us would have liked. But no matter how much I rationalized it, or tried to accept it, being treated as less than by your own mother leaves scars. I became quieter, more self-sufficient, and started emotionally checking out of family gatherings where Ethan was inevitably the center of attention. By senior year of high school, the college application process brought everything to a head again. I had worked hard, maintained a 4.0 GPA, scored well on my SATs, and built an impressive portfolio of architectural designs. Several prestigious universities were showing interest in me, including offering significant scholarship opportunities. Ethan, meanwhile, had barely graduated 4 years earlier and was on his second attempt at community college after failing out the first time. Yet somehow, Ethan's acceptance to the local state university's business program after finally completing his associate's degree was treated like he'd gotten into Harvard, while my acceptance to Cornell's architecture program on a substantial merit scholarship was mentioned in passing. "Cornell is so far away," was Mom's primary reaction, "and so cold. Are you sure you wouldn't be happier somewhere closer to home like where Ethan is going?" The contrast was so stark that even Ethan looked uncomfortable. "Dude, Cornell is Ivy League," he said. "That's a big deal." It was one of the few times Ethan acknowledged the disparity in how we were treated. Generally, he either didn't notice or chose not to see it. I couldn't really blame him for accepting the preferential treatment he'd always received. Why would anyone question being the favorite? By the time I packed my bags for college, I'd made peace with the fact that I would never be the son my mother wanted. I decided that I would build a life based on what I wanted, not in an endless pursuit of approval I would never receive. I told myself I was done trying to earn my mother's love. But as anyone who has ever been the unfavored child knows, making that decision and actually living it are two very different things. Cornell was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for architecture and design. My professors recognized my talent, and my classmates respected my work. Most importantly, I was hundreds of miles away from the constant reminder that I would never measure up to Ethan in my mother's eyes. The architecture program was demanding, but I thrived under the pressure. My sketches and models consistently earned top marks, and by sophomore year, one of my professors had connected me with a summer internship at a prestigious firm in New York City. When I called home to share the news, Dad answered the phone. "That's incredible, Mason. An internship like that could set you up for your entire career." I could hear the genuine pride in his voice, and it meant the world to me. When Mom got on the phone, her response was predictably lukewarm. "That's nice, honey. Oh, did Dad tell you Ethan's been made assistant manager at the electronics store? They gave him his own set of keys and everything." I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that my internship was with an internationally renowned architecture firm, while Ethan's promotion was at the same retail job he'd had since high school. Instead, I just said, "That's great. Tell him congratulations from me." During that first year, I also met Audrey. She was studying art history and literally bumped into me at the library while carrying a stack of books on Renaissance architecture. We ended up talking for hours, and by the end of the night, I knew she was special. Audrey came from a warm, supportive family where achievements were celebrated regardless of who accomplished them. The first time I visited her home during Thanksgiving break, her parents treated me like I mattered. They asked questions about my designs, displayed genuine interest in my internship plans, and made me feel valued in a way that was entirely foreign to me. "Your work is fascinating," Audrey's father said while looking through my portfolio. "You have a real talent for blending functional spaces with beautiful design." That simple comment nearly brought me to tears because it was exactly the kind of recognition I'd always craved from my own parents, specifically from my mother. Back at school, I also formed a close friendship with my roommate Trevor. He was studying engineering and understood the demands of a technical creative field. We bonded over all-nighters before big projects, shared a similar dry sense of humor, and eventually became the kind of friends who are more like brothers than my actual brother and I had ever been. "Your mom really doesn't get how impressive your work is, does she?" Trevor asked after overhearing one of my phone calls home. "She never has," I admitted. "I'm not sure she ever will." Trevor shook his head. "That's her loss, man." And he was right. As my college years progressed, I built a circle of people who valued me for who I was. Audrey, Trevor, my professors, even Audrey's family, they all saw something in me that my own mother seemed blind to. During holiday breaks, when I did go home, the dynamic hadn't changed. Ethan's mediocre achievements were still celebrated enthusiastically, while my successes were acknowledged briefly before the conversation moved on. The difference was that now I had enough external validation that Mom's indifference stung less. Grandma Eleanor remained my biggest champion in the family. She had moved to a beautiful retirement community but still insisted I visit whenever I was home. She displayed my architectural drawings in her living room and bragged about me to her friends. "You're building a wonderful life, Mason," she told me during my junior year winter break. "On your own terms. I admire that tremendously." During my senior year of college, the contrast between how my mother treated Ethan and me came to a head during the holidays. I had recently won a prestigious student competition that included publication in an architectural journal, a major accomplishment for an undergraduate. Meanwhile, Ethan had finally completed his business degree after 6 years and had an interview lined up with a local insurance company. At Christmas dinner, Mom raised a toast to Ethan's graduation and upcoming interview, speaking for nearly 5 minutes about his perseverance and how proud she was. When Dad tried to then toast to my award, she cut in after just a few sentences. "And of course, we're proud of Mason too. Now, who wants pie?" Later that night, I finally confronted her directly. We were alone in the kitchen, and I decided it was time to address what had been happening my entire life. "Mom, can I ask you something? Why don't my achievements ever seem to matter to you as much as Ethan's do?" She looked genuinely surprised. "What are you talking about? Of course they matter." "No, they don't. I just won an award that could launch my career, and you barely acknowledged it. Meanwhile, Ethan finally finished the degree he should have completed 4 years ago, and you act like he's cured cancer." Her face hardened. "That's not fair, Mason. Ethan has always struggled more than you. Things come easily to you." "They don't come easily, Mom. I work incredibly hard. The difference is that you notice his effort and ignore mine." "You're being too sensitive," she said dismissively. "I love both my sons equally." "You might love us both, but you don't treat us equally. You never have." She shook her head and busied herself with cleaning up, effectively ending the conversation. Nothing changed, but at least I'd finally said what I'd been holding in for years. When graduation approached, I learned I would be receiving my degree with highest honors. The ceremony would include special recognition for the select few students graduating summa cum laude. I sent formal invitations to my parents and Grandma Eleanor months in advance. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Mom called. "Mason, I'm not sure we'll be able to make it to your graduation after all. Ethan just found out he got the insurance job, and they're having a welcome dinner for new employees that same weekend." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "My college graduation happens once, Mom. This is one of the biggest days of my life." "I know, honey, but this job is such a big opportunity for your brother. You know how hard he's worked for this." In the end, Dad drove up alone. Grandma Eleanor, despite being 80 years old, insisted on making the trip as well. Audrey and her parents attended too, cheering loudly when my name was called. Mom sent a text message. "Congratulations. Sorry we couldn't be there. Ethan says hi from his company dinner." As I stood there in my cap and gown, surrounded by people who had chosen to be there for me, I made a decision. I would no longer expect anything from my mother. I would live my life, build my career, and find happiness without her approval. It was the only way forward. Little did I know that the pattern of favoritism was about to hit even more painful heights in the years to come. After graduation, I accepted a position with Sullivan & Partners, a cutting-edge architecture firm in Boston. The starting salary was excellent, the firm's reputation was stellar, and it put me about 4 hours from my hometown, just enough distance to make frequent visits impractical without completely cutting me off from family. Audrey and I had been dating for 3 years by this point, and she had been offered a curatorial assistant position at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. We decided to move together, finding a small but charming apartment in Cambridge that we could just afford if we combined our entry-level salaries. My career took off almost immediately. The skills and creativity that had made me stand out in college translated well to professional work. Within my first year, one of my design elements was incorporated into a major commercial project, earning me recognition within the firm and an unexpected bonus. I called home to share the news, hoping that professional success might finally earn my mother's genuine approval. Dad was thrilled, asking detailed questions about the project and my contribution. Mom said, "That's nice, dear," before quickly changing the subject to Ethan's new company car, a standard perk for all insurance agents at his level. Meanwhile, Ethan was struggling with the realities of his job. The insurance position wasn't working out as he'd hoped, and within 8 months he'd quit to start his own business selling custom promotional products to local companies. Mom spoke about this career move as if he were a visionary entrepreneur taking a bold risk rather than someone who couldn't handle the structure of corporate employment. "Your brother is so brave," she told me during one phone call. "It takes real courage to bet on yourself like that." What she didn't mention, but Dad later revealed, was that she had given Ethan $20,000 from her personal savings to launch this venture. This was money that had supposedly been set aside for both of us to eventually inherit. "I didn't know how to tell you," Dad said when he finally admitted this to me. "I tried to talk her out of it, but you know how she gets when it comes to your brother." Dad's health had begun to decline around this time. Years of stress and long hours had taken their toll, and at 60 he was diagnosed with heart problems that required him to significantly reduce his workload. This meant I started traveling home more frequently to help out, despite the discomfort of being around Mom's ongoing favoritism. During these visits, I noticed that Ethan rarely came by to help with yard work or home repairs, despite living just 20 minutes away. Yet Mom constantly made excuses for him. He was busy with his new business. He had networking events. He and Rachel were looking at houses in better neighborhoods. Rachel was Ethan's wife, a woman who seemed perfectly matched to him in her expectations of preferential treatment. She had never worked during their marriage, claiming various creative pursuits that never materialized into actual projects. She expected lavish gifts for every occasion and complained when the offerings didn't meet her standards. "I can't believe your mother only got me a $100 spa certificate for my birthday," I overheard her telling Ethan during one family dinner. "Your brother's girlfriend got a similar one, and she's not even family yet." What Rachel didn't know was that Audrey's gift had actually come from Dad alone, while Rachel's had come from both parents. The disparity continued even in the smallest details. During this period, my relationship with Grandma Eleanor deepened. Now in her late 70s, she remained sharp as ever and increasingly concerned about the family dynamics. "Your mother means well," she told me during a private lunch while I was home helping Dad recover from a minor procedure. "But she has never been able to see how her behavior affects you, and I worry about your father enabling it for so many years." "Dad tries," I said, defending him instinctively. "He does," she agreed. "But trying isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes you have to actually stand up and say no." As Dad's health issues continued, he began to have serious conversations with me about the future. During one visit, he asked me to take a walk with him around the neighborhood, something the doctor had encouraged for his recovery. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said as we walked slowly past familiar houses. "It's about my will and what happens after I'm gone." My stomach tightened. I didn't want to think about Dad not being here. "Mason, I've watched how your mother has treated you compared to Ethan all these years. I've tried to make up for it, but I know it hasn't been enough." "Dad, you don't have to." He held up his hand. "Please let me finish. I've made some decisions about my estate that your mother doesn't know about. I've set up a separate trust for you that she can't access or change. I want to make sure you're treated fairly, at least in this one way." I felt a complex mix of emotions: appreciation for his attempt at fairness, sadness, that it had come to this and anxiety about how Mom would react when she eventually found out. "There's something else," Dad continued. "I've spoken to your grandmother about all this. She's concerned about how your mother might handle things when I'm gone." Before he could elaborate, Dad stumbled slightly, putting his hand on a nearby fence to steady himself. His face had gone pale. "Dad, are you okay?" He tried to smile reassuringly, but I could tell something was wrong. "Just a little dizzy. Let's head back." We never finished that conversation. 2 days later, Dad collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. The heart attack was massive, and despite the doctor's best efforts, he never regained consciousness. Just like that, the one person who had truly seen me and my immediate family was gone. The day Dad died, everything changed. I got the call from Mom while I was in a client meeting. Her voice was so choked with tears, I could barely understand her, but the words, "hospital" and "heart attack" cut through clearly. I immediately booked a flight home, calling Audrey from the cab to the airport. "I'll meet you there," she said without hesitation. "Don't worry about anything else right now." When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was sitting beside Dad's bed holding his hand. The machines had been turned off, but they hadn't moved him yet. Ethan stood awkwardly in the corner of the room, Rachel beside him, staring at her phone. "He waited for you," Mom said, when she saw me, which I later learned wasn't actually true. The doctors confirmed Dad had already passed before I could possibly have arrived. But it was a nice thought, and one of the few genuinely maternal things Mom had said to me in years. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Despite being the younger son, I found myself handling most of the practical matters. My career in architecture had given me organizational skills that proved useful in navigating the chaos of death certificates, funeral homes, and insurance policies. Mom leaned heavily on Ethan, emotionally calling him at all hours and asking him to stay at the house. When decisions needed to be made about the service, she deferred to him on almost everything from the choice of music to which photo of Dad would be displayed. "What do you think your father would have wanted?" she asked Ethan during one planning session, despite the fact that I had spent far more time with Dad in recent years due to his health issues. Actually, I interjected gently. Dad told me specifically that he wanted Amazing Grace played. It was his mother's favorite hymn. Mom looked surprised, then slightly annoyed. "Well, Ethan thinks the other song would be more appropriate, and he knew your father's tastes better." I bit my tongue, remembering this wasn't the time for old arguments. Grandma Eleanor, who had arrived the day after Dad's death, caught my eye across the room and gave me a sad, knowing smile. The funeral itself was well attended. Dad had been respected in the community and had many friends from work and local organizations. I was asked to deliver one of the eulogies, which I crafted carefully to honor the man who had tried his best to bridge the gap in our fractured family. My father taught me that success isn't measured by recognition but by the quiet satisfaction of doing what's right. I said, my voice steady, despite the grief tightening my chest. He showed me that sometimes the greatest strength is in silent support, and that love doesn't always need to be loud to be real. From the front row, I saw Mom dabbing at her eyes while leaning against Ethan. Grandma Eleanor sat straight-backed and dignified, her eyes never leaving me as I spoke. At the graveside, the reality of Dad's absence hit me full force. As they lowered his casket, I felt a fundamental shift in my world. The buffer between Mom's favoritism and me was gone. The quiet advocate who had tried to balance the scales when no one was looking would never make another subtle intervention on my behalf. Audrey stood beside me, her hand firm in mine. On my other side, unexpectedly, was Grandma Eleanor. At 80 years old, she had insisted on standing for the entire graveside service, refusing the chair that had been provided for her. "He was my son," she had said simply, when the funeral director tried to convince her to sit. "I'll stand for him one last time." After everyone else had left, Grandma Eleanor asked me to stay behind with her for a moment. She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope. "Harold wanted you to have this," she said, using Dad's formal name as she sometimes did. "He gave it to me last month, almost as if he knew." Inside the envelope was a letter in Dad's neat engineer's handwriting, dated just 3 weeks earlier. "Mason," it began, "if you're reading this, then the conversations we never finished will have to remain that way. I've spent too many years watching your mother favor your brother, making excuses to myself about why I didn't do more to stop it. The truth is, I was a coward in many ways. I didn't want to risk my marriage by challenging her directly, so I tried to make it up to you in smaller ways. I know now that wasn't enough. You have grown into an extraordinary man, despite not because of how you were raised. Your talent, your kindness, your resilience, these are qualities that make me prouder than I can express. I've made arrangements to ensure that you are treated fairly in material matters after I'm gone, but I know that doesn't heal the emotional wounds of a lifetime. All I can say now is that I love you, son, completely and without reservation. You were never second best to me. I read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and putting it in my pocket. Grandma Eleanor watched me with tears in her eyes. He meant every word she said softly. In the days after the funeral, the practical matters of Dad's estate had to be addressed. The family gathered in the office of Dad's attorney, Mr. Winters, for the reading of the will. Mom seemed confident about what would happen, having apparently assumed that everything would be split equally between her and the 2 children, or perhaps even with a larger portion for Ethan. Mr. Winters adjusted his glasses and began reading. The will was relatively straightforward. Mom would get the house and its contents, as expected. There was a life insurance policy that would provide her with financial security. But then came the surprise: the bulk of Dad's personal investments and savings had been placed in a separate trust with me as the sole beneficiary. "This can't be right," Mom interrupted. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Walker," Mr. Winters said calmly. "Your husband was very clear about his wishes. He updated his will last year, and I personally verified that he understood the implications of his decisions." Mom turned to look at me, a mixture of shock and betrayal on her face. "Did you know about this?" "I knew Dad was concerned about being fair," I said carefully, "but I didn't know the details." The drive home was silent and tense. When we arrived back at the house, Mom immediately went to her room without speaking to anyone. Ethan pulled me aside, his expression unusually serious. "Look, I know things haven't always been balanced between us," he said awkwardly. "But did you have to take everything? Mom's really upset." "I didn't take anything, Ethan. Dad made these decisions on his own, and Mom is well provided for. She has the house, the life insurance, and her own savings. I didn't mention that a significant portion of her savings had already gone to fund his business ventures. Still, it feels like you turned Dad against us somehow." I almost laughed at the irony. "Trust me, that's not what happened." In the following weeks, I returned to Boston and tried to process everything that had occurred. The grief of losing Dad, the complicated feelings about his final attempt to balance the scales, and the newly strained relationship with Mom and Ethan all weighed heavily on me. Audrey was my rock during this period. She listened without judgment, held me when the grief became overwhelming, and gently encouraged me to focus on healing rather than resentment. One evening, about 2 months after Dad's death, we were walking along the Charles River at sunset. We'd been discussing a weekend trip we'd planned to take with Dad before his sudden passing, a visit to Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater, which Dad had always wanted to see. "We should still go," Audrey said. "Your dad would have wanted that." "You're right," I agreed. He was so excited about it. We stopped walking, looking out over the water as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink. In that moment, I realized how completely Audrey had become my family, the one person who saw me clearly and loved me without conditions or comparisons. "Marry me," I said, the words coming out before I'd even processed the thought. Audrey turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "What?" "Marry me," I repeated more confidently this time. "I don't have a ring yet, and this isn't how I plan to do this, but I know one thing for certain. I want to build a life with you." Her smile lit up brighter than the sunset behind her. "Yes," she said simply. "Absolutely yes." That weekend, we did go to Fallingwater, and standing on the iconic balcony overlooking the waterfall, I felt Dad's presence strongly. He would have loved this place with its perfect harmony of natural and built environments, and he would have loved Audrey, who understood that this trip was part of my grieving process. When we returned to Boston, I bought a ring, a simple but elegant diamond that I knew suited Audrey's taste. We took photos of the ring and of us together to share the news with family and friends. Audrey's parents were thrilled, immediately calling to congratulate us and beginning to talk about wedding plans. Trevor organized an impromptu celebration with our friends in Boston. Grandma Eleanor sent a beautiful handwritten letter expressing her joy and including a generous check to help with wedding expenses. Mom's reaction was considerably more subdued. "Well, that's nice," she said when I called to tell her. "Have you set a date yet?" "Not officially, but we're thinking next spring." "Oh, you might want to reconsider that timing," she said quickly. "Ethan and Rachel are planning something special for their 10th anniversary around then. They're thinking of renewing their vows." I felt the familiar sting of being considered secondary but pushed past it. "We'll keep that in mind, but we'd really like a spring wedding." What I didn't know then was that this conversation was the prelude to what would become the most painful example yet of where I stood in my mother's priorities. Audrey and I began planning our wedding with excitement and optimism. We wanted something meaningful but not extravagant, a celebration that reflected our values and relationship. We found a beautiful venue, a restored historic building with architectural significance that spoke to my professional passions and Audrey's love of history. The venue had limited availability, so we immediately secured a date in late April. It was perfect. Spring flowers would be blooming, the weather would likely be mild, and it gave us just over 10 months to plan. We sent save-the-date cards to our guest list in June, giving everyone plenty of advance notice. I called Mom personally to make sure she had received her save-the-date card. "Yes, it came yesterday," she confirmed. "April 27th. I put it on my calendar." "Great," I said, feeling relieved that there would be no confusion. "We're really excited about the venue we found." "That's nice, dear." "Oh, before I forget, Ethan and Rachel stopped by yesterday with the most wonderful news. They're planning a big anniversary celebration for their 10th. They're thinking of doing a vow renewal ceremony and then a big party. Isn't that lovely?" "Sure," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "When are they planning to do it?" "They're looking at spring dates." Rachel has always loved spring events. A sense of foreboding crept over me, but I pushed it aside. Surely they wouldn't choose the same weekend after we'd already sent out save the dates. Even in my family, there had to be limits to the favoritism. For the next few months, wedding planning proceeded smoothly. Audrey and I chose our wedding party with Trevor as my best man. We selected a caterer, hired a photographer, and Audrey found a dress she loved. I threw myself into designing unique invitations that showcased my architectural style combined with elements of Audrey's art history background. Throughout this period, Mom called regularly but rarely to ask about our wedding plans. Instead, she would spend most of each call talking about Ethan and Rachel's anniversary celebration, which was apparently growing more elaborate by the week. "They're thinking of having it at the country club," she told me in September. "Rachel wants to wear her original wedding dress, but they're adding a blue sash to symbolize their years together. So creative." I tried to be supportive, but it was difficult when Mom showed so little interest in my upcoming wedding. When I did manage to tell her about some special detail Audrey and I had planned, she would acknowledge it briefly before steering the conversation back to Ethan's event. In late October, just as we were finalizing our formal invitations, I received a text from Ethan that made my stomach drop. "Hey bro, just wanted to give you a heads up. We've scheduled our anniversary party for the 27th of April. Mom's super excited about helping us plan it. Hope there's no conflict with anything you've got going on." I stared at the phone in disbelief. There was no way this was a coincidence. We had sent save the dates months ago. Mom had explicitly confirmed the date. This was deliberate. I called Ethan immediately. "Did you seriously schedule your anniversary party on my wedding day?" I asked without preamble when he answered. "Oh, is that the same day?" "Shit, I didn't realize," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Ethan, we sent save the dates in June. Mom confirmed she received it. How could you not know?" "Look, it wasn't intentional," he said defensively. "This was the only weekend the country club had available that worked with Rachel's parents' schedule. They're coming in from Arizona. Can you change it? We've already put deposits down on everything, and our invitations are about to go out." There was a pause. "I don't think that's possible. We've already paid the non-refundable deposit, and Rachel's really set on this date. Can't you guys move yours?" You haven't sent the actual invitations yet, right? I felt a surge of anger so intense I had to take a deep breath before responding. No, Ethan, we can't move our wedding. We sent save the dates 4 months ago specifically so people could plan accordingly. You knew the date. Well, this puts Mom in a tough position, he said, as if that were the primary concern. I'll talk to Mom myself, I said, ending the call before I said something I might regret. When I called Mom, she answered with a cheerfulness that only intensified my suspicion that this conflict was not accidental. Mason, I was just thinking about you. I found these lovely napkins that would be perfect for your reception. Mom, did you know that Ethan and Rachel scheduled their anniversary party on the same day as my wedding? Her tone changed immediately. Oh yes, about that. It's unfortunate, but it was the only date that worked for them. The country club is very exclusive, you know. Mom, we sent save the dates months ago. You knew when our wedding was scheduled. I know, dear, but this is their 10th anniversary. It's a very significant milestone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And my wedding isn't significant. Of course it is, but you have to understand, they've been planning this for ages. No, they haven't. We announced our date in June. They just booked this recently. She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. Mason, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal about this. There are plenty of other weekends. Not for us, Mom. Our venue is booked, deposits are paid, and guests have already made travel arrangements. We're not changing our wedding date. There was a long pause. Well, I don't know what you expect me to do. I can't be in 2 places at once. And there it was, the moment I had been dreading. She was actually considering missing my wedding to attend Ethan's anniversary party. I expect you to be at my wedding, Mom. I'm your son, and I'm getting married. Once. You're putting me in an impossible position, she said, her voice taking on the wounded tone she often used when challenged. Ethan will be devastated if I'm not there for his special day. And I won't be devastated if you miss my wedding, I asked incredulously. That's not what I meant. I need some time to figure this out. After that conversation, I was too upset to think clearly. I called Audrey, who rushed home from work to find me pacing our apartment in a state of disbelief. She's actually considering not coming. I told her, still struggling to process it. My own mother might skip my wedding for my brother's anniversary party. Audrey's face reflected my pain. Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry. What kind of mother does that? I asked the hurt child inside me, finally giving voice to the question I'd been carrying my whole life. I don't know, Audrey said softly, taking my hands in hers. But I do know that we're going to have a beautiful wedding surrounded by people who truly love and support us. And if your mother makes the wrong choice, that's her loss. In the weeks that followed, the situation deteriorated further. Mom began suggesting compromises that all involved us changing our plans to accommodate Ethan and Rachel. Perhaps we could have a morning ceremony, and they could have an evening reception, or maybe we could move our wedding to the following day, making it a Sunday wedding, when many of our guests would need to travel. Each suggestion made it clearer that in her mind, our wedding was the flexible event, not their anniversary party. The years of subtle and not-so-subtle favoritism had culminated in this. My once-in-a-lifetime wedding day was less important than my brother's party celebrating a marriage that from all appearances wasn't even particularly happy. Grandma Eleanor was outraged when I told her what was happening. Despite her age, she immediately offered to intervene. This has gone too far, she said firmly. I'm going to speak to your mother. I never learned exactly what was said during that conversation, but afterward Mom stopped pushing for us to change our date. Instead, she went silent on the subject entirely, neither confirming nor denying her attendance at our wedding. As our wedding day approached and final RSVPs were due, I made one last attempt to clear the air. I called Mom and asked directly if she would be attending. Her response broke something in me that I hadn't realized was still intact. Mason, I've thought about this a lot, and I just can't miss Ethan and Rachel's celebration. They've put so much into planning it, and Rachel would never forgive me. I hope you can understand. I couldn't speak for several seconds. When I finally found my voice, it was steady but cold. I understand. Perfectly, Mom. You've made your choice clear. Not just about the wedding, but about our relationship going forward. Don't be dramatic, Mason. It's just one day. It's my wedding day, I said quietly, and you're choosing to attend an anniversary party instead. That says everything I need to know about where I stand with you. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. The pain was acute, but beneath it was a strange sense of clarity. The dynamic that had defined my childhood and adult relationship with my mother had finally been laid completely bare. There was no more room for excuses or rationalization. My mother had chosen explicitly and unambiguously to prioritize my brother over me on what should have been one of the most important days of my life. And in doing so, she had finally freed me from the hope that things might someday be different. Our wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with spring sunshine filtering through new leaves and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of early blooms. The historic building looked even more spectacular than when we'd first seen it, with white flowers and greenery accenting its classic architecture. As I stood in a side room preparing for the ceremony, Trevor straightened my tie and handed me a small glass of whiskey. "One toast before we go out there," he said, raising his own glass. "To building the family you deserve." I smiled, genuinely touched by his words. "Thank you. For everything." Grandma Eleanor had arrived the day before, insisting on staying at a hotel despite our offer to host her in our guest room. At 80 years old, she looked elegant and determined as she made her way to the front row where my mother should have been sitting. "You look handsome, Mason," she said, reaching up to pat my cheek. "Your father would have been so proud today." Those words meant everything to me. As I took my place at the altar, I looked out at the gathered guests. Audrey's large, supportive family filled several rows. My friends from college and work sat interspersed with hers. The only glaringly empty seats were where my immediate family should have been. But as the music began and Audrey appeared at the end of the aisle, those empty seats ceased to matter. She was radiant, her eyes locked on mine as she walked toward our future together. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever family wounds I carried, they would not define the family we would build together. The ceremony was everything we had hoped for: meaningful, personal, and filled with genuine emotion. We had written our own vows, and as I promised Audrey to cherish her and support her dreams as she had always supported mine, I felt a sense of healing beginning to take root. At the reception, Trevor gave a best man speech that carefully avoided any mention of my absent mother and brother. Instead, he focused on our friendship, my character, and his admiration for the relationship Audrey and I had built. "I've watched Mason overcome challenges with grace and determination," he said, raising his glass. "And I've seen how completely Audrey accepts and loves him for exactly who he is." Together, they remind us all what family should really be about. The evening was filled with dancing, laughter, and the kind of genuine celebration that can't be manufactured. Audrey's parents treated me like their own son, making a point to tell me how happy they were to officially welcome me to their family. Late in the evening, Grandma Eleanor found a quiet moment to speak with me alone. "I want you to know something," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "What your mother did today was wrong, deeply wrong. And while I've tried to understand her behavior over the years, I can no longer make excuses for it." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "But I also want you to know this," she continued. "You have built a beautiful life, Mason. You've chosen love and growth over bitterness. That shows remarkable strength of character." The next morning, as Audrey and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I made the conscious decision not to check social media. I knew that if I did, I would likely see posts from my mother or brother about their anniversary celebration. Instead, I focused on the beginning of my married life and the 2-week trip to Italy that awaited us. It wasn't until we returned that I saw the posts. There were dozens of photos from Ethan and Rachel's anniversary party, with Mom featured prominently in many of them. She looked happy and proud, posing with the couple and helping cut their anniversary cake. The captions spoke of family traditions and celebrating a decade of love with those who matter most. The exclusion was so complete, so deliberate, that it left no room for ambiguity. I hadn't just been left out of an event, I had been erased from the family narrative entirely. After seeing those posts, I made a decision I had been considering for years. I went no contact with my mother. I didn't make a dramatic announcement or send an explanatory email. I simply stopped responding to her occasional texts and declined her infrequent calls. For 2 years, Audrey and I built our life together without my mother in it. My career continued to flourish, with a major promotion making me the youngest associate partner in my firm's history. Audrey secured a position as a full curator at the museum, specializing in architectural elements in Renaissance art. We bought our first home, a fixer-upper, with good bones that allowed me to put my design skills to practical use. We discussed starting a family, beginning to plan for children who would know what unconditional love felt like from the start. Throughout this period, Grandma Eleanor remained a steady presence in our lives. Though her age made travel difficult, we visited her regularly, and she delighted in seeing photos of our home renovation progress and hearing about our professional achievements. Meanwhile, through occasional updates from Grandma Eleanor, I learned that Ethan's business was struggling. The initial success had been short-lived, and he had cycled through several business ideas without finding sustainable success. Mom had continued to provide financial support, depleting her savings further. It was during this period that I received a prestigious architectural award for a sustainable urban housing project I had designed. The award ceremony was covered in several industry publications, and apparently word got back to my hometown. The first text from Mom in months arrived shortly after. "Just saw about your award. Congratulations. Would love to hear more about it." I didn't respond. The time when her approval would have meant something had long passed. More texts followed over the subsequent weeks, each one acting as if there had been no estrangement, no missed wedding, no 2 years of silence. "Thinking of you today. Saw a building on television that reminded me of your style. Hope you and Audrey are well." I showed these messages to Audrey, unsure how to feel about this sudden attempt at connection. "What do you think she wants?" I asked. Audrey considered this carefully. "I'm not sure, but I think you should trust your instincts about whether her interest is genuine." My instinct said it wasn't, and I continued my policy of no contact. Then, about 27 months after our wedding, I received an unexpected call from Grandma Eleanor's retirement community. Eleanor had been hospitalized after a fall, and the prognosis wasn't good. I immediately booked flights for Audrey and me. When we arrived at the hospital, we found Mom already there, sitting awkwardly in the waiting room. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, focusing instead on finding Eleanor's doctor. The news wasn't what I had hoped for. At 82, Eleanor's body wasn't responding well to treatment and complications had developed. The doctor spoke candidly about preparing for the worst while hoping for improvement. Over the next several days, Audrey and I practically lived at the hospital. Mom appeared daily as well, though we managed to coordinate our visits to minimize interaction. The one time we ended up in Eleanor's room simultaneously, the tension was palpable, until Eleanor herself addressed it. "For goodness sake," she said weakly from her hospital bed, "I'm too old and too tired for this. Diane, go get yourself some coffee. I need to speak with Mason alone." After Mom left, Eleanor fixed me with the direct gaze that had always seen through pretense. "Mason, I need to tell you something important." I moved closer to her bed, taking her frail hand in mine. "What is it, Grandma?" "I've made decisions about my estate," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Decisions your mother won't like, but that I believe are right." "Grandma, you don't need to." "Let me finish," she interrupted. "I've watched for decades as your mother favored Ethan, making excuse after excuse for behavior that didn't deserve it. I saw how it hurt you, and how it hurt your father to witness it. I'm making my own statement with what I leave behind." I didn't know what to say, so I simply squeezed her hand gently. "You've made me proud, Mason," she continued. "You've built a good life despite the hurt. You've chosen love over bitterness. That's a rare strength." 3 days later, with Audrey and me at her bedside, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Mom had left just an hour earlier, promising to return in the morning. The funeral was arranged quickly, a small service that honored Eleanor's practical nature and dislike of excessive ceremony. Mom and I maintained our distance, communicating only when absolutely necessary about arrangements. It wasn't until the reading of the will that the full impact of Eleanor's decisions became clear. The family gathered in the same law office where Dad's will had been read 3 years earlier, though this time with Mr. Winter's partner, Miss Reed, presiding. Eleanor's estate was substantial. In addition to her elegant home in the retirement community, she had significant investments and savings that had grown over decades of careful management. The will began with small bequests to various charities and friends before addressing the family. To my grandson, Ethan Walker, I leave the sum of $10,000 with the hope that he will use it wisely. I saw Ethan's face fall at the relatively modest amount. Rachel beside him made no attempt to hide her disappointment. To my daughter-in-law, Diane Walker, I leave my collection of family photographs and personal correspondence that she might better understand the values that guided our family. Mom sat very still, her expression unreadable. To my grandson, Mason Walker, and his wife, Audrey, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my home investments and all other assets not specifically designated. Mason has demonstrated the character, responsibility, and compassion that I value most, and I trust him to be a good steward of what I leave behind. The room went completely silent. The remainder represented well over $2 million in assets, a fact that everyone present quickly calculated. Additionally, Miss Reed continued, I am instructed to deliver this letter to Diane Walker. She handed Mom a sealed envelope. With shaking hands, Mom opened it and began to read. I couldn't see the contents, but I watched as her face went pale, then flushed with what might have been shame. When the meeting concluded, Mom left quickly without speaking to anyone. Ethan approached me in the parking lot, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. What the hell, Mason? How did you manipulate Grandma into this? I didn't manipulate anyone, Ethan. This was her decision. Right, he scoffed. First Dad, now Grandma. Somehow you've convinced everyone that you deserve everything. That's not what happened, I said tiredly. And honestly, Ethan, after everything with the wedding, I don't think you get to play the victim here. Rachel, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. This is about the wedding. Seriously, you're still holding a grudge because your brother had an anniversary party the same day. Get over it. I looked at her incredulously. It wasn't just any day. It was my wedding day, and my mother chose to attend your party instead. So yes, that matters to me. Before the conversation could escalate further, Audrey gently took my arm. We should go, she said quietly. This isn't the time or place. She was right, as she so often was. We left without further confrontation, but I knew this wasn't the end of the family drama. The inheritance had shifted the power dynamic in a way that would force long-buried issues to the surface. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a text from Mom asking if we could meet. After discussing it with Audrey, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. What I didn't expect was that this meeting would begin the most difficult and potentially healing chapter in my relationship with my mother. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, which suited me fine. Public places minimize the potential for emotional scenes, and after 30 years of navigating my mother's favoritism, I had developed a strong aversion to conflict. Mom was already there, sitting at a corner table, with her hands wrapped around a mug, as if seeking warmth despite the mild spring day. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of recent stress. Thank you for coming, she said, as I sat down across from her. I nodded but didn't immediately speak. After ordering my own coffee, I waited for her to explain why she had wanted this meeting. I suppose you're wondering what was in the letter from your grandmother, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. If you want to tell me, I'll listen, I said neutrally. She took a deep breath. Eleanor didn't mince words. She wrote that she was excluding me from her will because of how I had treated you throughout your life, particularly my decision to miss your wedding. She said that by consistently favoring Ethan, I had failed as a mother to you, and that the inheritance decision was her final attempt to balance the scales. I was surprised by her candor. The mom I knew would have softened the message, reframed it to make herself the victim. She also included copies of letters your father had written to her over the years, Mom continued. Letters expressing his concern about how I treated you compared to Ethan. I had no idea he had felt that way so strongly. I thought about Dad's private struggles, his attempts to compensate for Mom's favoritism without directly confronting her about it. Dad tried to create balance where he could, I said. Mom looked down at her coffee. Mason, I know you probably won't believe this, but I never intended to hurt you. In my mind, I was just giving Ethan the extra support he needed. He always struggled more than you did. It was the same justification she had offered for years, but now sitting across from her after everything that had happened, I couldn't let it pass unchallenged. That's not true, Mom. Ethan struggled because you enabled him to. You cleaned up his messes, funded his failures, and celebrated his mediocrity while ignoring my achievements. You created the very dynamic you used to justify your favoritism. She flinched at my words but didn't immediately deny them. After a moment, she spoke again. When you were born, you were so different from Ethan. You were quieter, more self-sufficient. You seemed to need me less while Ethan was always demanding attention. It became a pattern that I didn't know how to break. You could have broken it by showing up for my wedding. I said the words coming out more sharply than I had intended. That was your chance to show me I mattered too, and you chose not to take it. To my surprise, tears filled her eyes. I know, there's no excuse for that. None. I've had a lot of time to think since Eleanor's letter, and I keep coming back to that decision. It was unforgivable. Then why did you do it? I asked the question that had haunted me for 2 years. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was a coward. Because Ethan and Rachel pressured me relentlessly, and I was afraid of losing my relationship with them if I chose you. Because I had spent so many years building my identity around being the mother Ethan needed that I didn't know how to be the mother you deserved. Her admission stunned me. In all our years of conflict, Mom had never acknowledged her behavior so directly. The irony, she continued, is that I lost my relationship with you anyway. And now Ethan barely speaks to me since the will reading. He blames me for not somehow changing Eleanor's mind. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that my grandmother had seen the truth so clearly, sadness for the relationship I'd never had with my mother, and a strange, unexpected flicker of hope that perhaps at long last Mom was beginning to understand the damage she had caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mason, she said, meeting my eyes. I don't deserve it, but I am asking for a chance to try to do better, to be in your life on whatever terms you set. The money doesn't matter to me. What matters is that I've finally realized what I've lost by my own choices. I wanted to believe her, but after a lifetime of disappointment, trust didn't come easily. I need time to think about this, I said finally. And if I do decide to give you another chance, there would have to be boundaries. Clear ones. She nodded quickly. Of course, anything. I need to talk to Audrey too. This affects her as well. I understand. And Mason, thank you for meeting me today. I know you didn't have to. As I drove home afterward, I found myself remembering something Grandma Eleanor had once told me. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating the possibility for a different future. When I got home, Audrey was waiting with her characteristic patience and wisdom. I told her everything about the meeting, including Mom's unprecedented admission of her failures. What do you think I asked her? Am I crazy to even consider giving her another chance? Audrey considered this carefully. I don't think you're crazy, but I do think you need to protect yourself. If you decide to rebuild a relationship with your mother, it should be on terms that acknowledge the past rather than pretending it didn't happen. And what would that look like? Maybe starting small. Coffee once a month. Clear boundaries about what topics are open for discussion. And most importantly, an understanding that if she falls back into old patterns, you'll step away again. Over the next few weeks, I thought deeply about what I wanted. The hurt child in me craved the maternal love I'd never fully received. The rational adult recognized that even if Mom was genuinely remorseful, decades of behavior patterns wouldn't change overnight. Finally, I called her and suggested another meeting, this time with Audrey present as well. We met at a quiet restaurant, and I laid out my conditions for cautiously reopening our relationship. First, I need an acknowledgement that what happened throughout my childhood, and especially with the wedding, was wrong. Not just regrettable or a misunderstanding, but wrong. Mom nodded. It was wrong. All of it. I failed you as a mother, and there's no justification for that. Second, if we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it has to be balanced. That means no more talking endlessly about Ethan and his life, while showing minimal interest in mine. I understand, she said. I want to know about your life, Mason. Really know. Third, we start small. Monthly meetings like this. We build trust gradually. That seems fair, she agreed. And finally, I need you to understand that this is conditional. If you revert to old patterns, if you dismiss my feelings, or prioritize Ethan in hurtful ways, again, I will cut contact, permanently this time. She looked pained but nodded. I accept those terms. I know I have to earn your trust, and I'm willing to try. The next several months were a strange new chapter in our relationship. Mom made visible efforts to change, asking questions about my work and genuinely listening to the answers. She brought photos of my childhood that I'd never seen before, sharing memories from a perspective I hadn't heard. She even tentatively began to build a relationship with Audrey, recognizing her importance in my life. There were missteps, of course. Old habits emerged occasionally, like when she automatically defended Ethan when I mentioned his name in passing. But unlike before, she caught herself, apologized, and tried to do better the next time. 6 months into this cautious reconciliation, Audrey and I invited her to dinner at our home for the first time. As we gave her a tour showing the renovations I had designed and implemented, she stopped in what would eventually be a nursery. "Are you planning?" she asked, looking at the half-painted walls. "We're expecting," Audrey confirmed, smiling. "Due in February." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be wonderful parents," she said softly. "Both of you." It wasn't a dramatic declaration of change. There was no movie moment where all past hurts were suddenly healed. But in that simple acknowledgement of our shared future, I felt something shift. The possibility of a different kind of relationship, not perfect, not without its scars, but perhaps finally based on seeing each other clearly. As for Ethan, our relationship remained distant. The inheritance had created a rift that his pride wouldn't allow him to bridge. Occasionally, Mom would mention attempts to connect with him, but I made it clear that my boundaries included not being her emotional support regarding Ethan. "That's something you need to work through with him," I told her. "Or with a therapist, but not with me." She accepted this, another small sign of change. In the years since, we've built a cautious but increasingly genuine relationship. When our daughter Eleanor, named after her great-grandmother, was born, Mom became the grandmother I had doubted. She could be present, supportive, and careful to give Audrey and me space to parent on our terms. The trust builds slowly, one interaction at a time. There are still moments when old wounds throb, when a careless word or forgotten promise triggers memories of a lifetime of being second best. But there are also new memories forming. Mom teaching little Eleanor to bake cookies, showing up reliably for birthdays and school events, respecting our family boundaries. I've come to understand that the inheritance wasn't just about money. It was Grandma Eleanor's final lesson to all of us about values, consequences, and the true meaning of family. The financial security it provided was significant, but the clarity it forced was the real gift. Looking back on this journey from neglected child to confident adult, I realized that family wounds don't heal in straight lines. Reconciliation doesn't erase history. It builds something new that acknowledges the past while refusing to be defined by it. The child who craved his mother's approval has become a man who understands his own worth regardless of others' ability to recognize it. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable inheritance of all. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who hurt you? How did you balance forgiveness with self-protection? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for your own worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the family we build matters more than the family we're born into.